Welcome back everybody, Dan here. Thanks so much for joining in for today's video. So, the topic of today's video, harder is more realistic. So what I'm talking about is this thought or belief that we as sim racers have had for a very, very long time, that the harder a sim racing game is, the more realistic it is. Now I know all of you have heard someone say this at some point in time. You may believe it, you may not believe it, but I think the majority of racing simmers do believe this to be true. So I've thought about making a video on this before, kind of giving my point on how I feel about this, but I just never have until today. And the reason why I'm going ahead and making this video now is due to a lot of the comments I got on my last video. So if you haven't seen my last video, I made a video talking about how WRC 8 is my favorite rally game I've ever played. I'm not a huge rally junkie. However, I have played most of the rally games, and as of right now, as it stands, WRC 8 is the most fun one I've ever played, and I've got the most enjoyment out of it. Now, down in the comments below, there were a lot of people writing off WRC 8 immediately, and their reasoning was that they're saying it's not as realistic as Dirt Rally 2.0. And so, let's talk about that for a minute. I can't sit here and tell you that Dirt Rally 2.0 is or is not more realistic than WRC 8. I can't tell you that because I have never personally driven a WRC or any rally car in the real world through the woods down a path at 100 plus miles an hour. I've never done that, so I don't know how it feels in the real world, so I can't tell you which one is more realistic. But I'd be willing to bet that those people making those comments probably couldn't tell me either. They're just assuming that Dirt Rally 2.0 is more realistic because it's harder. Now, I have played both, and I do agree that Dirt Rally is much harder than WRC. But does that mean that one is more realistic? No, it doesn't. They don't necessarily correlate like that, and honestly, like I said, I can't tell you which one is more realistic. Now, I have to be honest, the more I hear and see people make the determination on whether or not a game is realistic based on how hard it is, I feel like it's just getting very toxic in our sim racing community. And I use that word very carefully because toxic is a very harsh word to use. But you have to remember that people are looking at these comments, people are reading these reviews and listening to these YouTube reviews, and when you say a game is unrealistic based on the fact that you think it's not hard enough, it's just not necessarily true. Now, there was a time back in the day where this did hold true, and that's where this belief came from. I'm old enough to remember a time when there was a very distinct, different two types of racing games, and that was it. On the very far left, you had what was distinctly an arcade game. And then on the far other side, you had very distinct sim racing games. And they were very different, and there were really no games in the middle to bridge that gap. And generally, at that time, and we're talking 20 years ago or more, the simulation style games were much harder just by their general nature. But that's no longer the case. Nowadays, a lot of them have this blending, and it's getting harder and harder to tell the difference. And now I'm not attempting here to make a video on simulation versus arcade. I'm not trying to get off on that tangent, but they are very similar in a way. And all I'm saying is that the games we have now and the technology and these amazing force feedback wheels and these pedal sets and all this stuff that we have, we're at a point where hard necessarily doesn't mean most realistic. In some cases it would be, sure. It would be much harder to handle a Group 5 race car from that era than it is to drive something like a GT3 or GT4 or something like that, or even a Formula 1 car. It's going to be much harder to drive those older cars, so there should be a scale there where certain vehicles are harder to drive than others. But this rule of thumb, I just don't think applies anymore as far as if it's harder, it's more realistic. Because many cars, let's think about it this way. Modern race cars are built and over-engineered to go around a circuit or around a racetrack as easily and as quickly as possible. The whole intent to that is to make someone easily go very fast around a racetrack. So making it very hard in a game to be quick is, in its own sense, going against what realism is today as far as racing. So for me, at least, making that argument that harder makes a game more realistic just doesn't really apply anymore, especially now that games have just started blending together and it's harder to tell what is an arcade and what is a simulation. And really, whether or not something is realistic, we need to leave that up to the professionals. We need to ask people who have actually done it in the real world which game is more realistic. If you really need to know, ask the people who have done this type of racing, whatever that may be, in the real world, and have them let you know how realistic it is. But just simply basing it by which one is harder, I just don't think that's the route we need to go anymore. And a lot of times it has this negative effect, like down in the comments. Just kind of consider, if somebody came to one of my videos or anyone's videos and they see those comments where somebody is saying, don't even consider WRC, it's not realistic at all because it's not hard enough, you may detract a lot of people that may be new to our hobby from even attempting the game, because fear of playing any game, first of all, is going to be too hard if it's supposed to be realistic. And second of all, you may stop them from playing WRC, which they really may enjoy, just because you simply think it's not as realistic because it's not as hard, which I just don't, again, I can't emphasize enough, I just don't think that is really accurate anymore. I think every game is designed to be a specific thing aimed at a specific group of people, but at the end of the day, they're all simulating in some way driving a car. Just because one is slightly harder than the other doesn't make one better or one more realistic, in my opinion. And that's kind of my thoughts on it. It kind of was in the back of my head, and I said, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and make this video. Been considering making a video about this topic for a while. So let me know what you think in the comments, guys. As always, I'd like to know what you think about it. Am I totally crazy on this? Does it still hold true with the Sims we have today? Or do you agree with me? Or, whatever you think. And if you enjoyed this video, click the like button. Remember to click the subscribe and the bell if you want to be notified when I create more content. Other than that, guys, thanks so much for hanging out with me for this video. As always, I appreciate it, and I'll talk to you in the next video. We'll see you later.